Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation about grief and the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Dr. Heather Wagner, and I am a member of the COVID-19 task force with the American Music Therapy Association. Today, I welcome Dr. Lauren DiMaio, who was an expert on grief and faculty at Texas Women's University, to talk a bit about what we are all experiencing as we enter the year anniversary mark for the COVID-19 pandemic here in the United States. So welcome, Lauren. I'm glad you could be here with me today. And I'd just like to start with a pretty basic question for you is thinking about grief in general and your knowledge of grief. What is different with the grief that we may be experiencing that is associated with the pandemic?
Thanks, Heather. So I think it's important to remember that when looking at grief through the lens of the pandemic, it's not just one type of grief. So we are used to grief associated with the death of a person, or sometimes in instances, it's like a chronic grief when several people die within a limited time period, or it's grief associated with the loss of a job or secondary loss of something like that. And so there's these pulled apart instances that we are familiar with. But when we think about grief in the pandemic, it's not just one thing. So the context is that it's can be death, and those are complicated griefs, or it can be a loss because our lives are not the same. And it can be all of it. And it can also be that anticipatory grief as
Mm.
well, of I'm waiting for something bad to happen. So when thinking about what my experience has been of this pandemic with grief, I can't always look to my past history of grief and how I've coped with it to help me cope with this, because it's so many layers of grief that I'm coping with every day. And it's that sustained experience that's also impacting the context of the grief, that I don't know when this is going to end, or I don't know when I'm going to have another grief experience. So all of these layers of this grief make it extremely unique, that we can't look to the past to predict the future.
I also think too, when I reflect on that, it's this constant decision making. I mean, we're always making decisions, but in this context, we are making decisions every day trying to mitigate risk more than probably ever. If I do this, how can I make it safe? And so it's the grief process with all of the stress of trying to keep ourselves safe, our families safe, our clients safe, and still be a human being. And so I think all of that together has made this harder than perhaps a standard grief process might be.
Right. So, I'm thinking about a personal grief. I could go to work and that would be a distraction.
Mm.
But now going to work just adds to it. It's not a distraction. It's not a place where I can feel like my old self. It's a place where I work at a university. Now, going to work means I'm worrying about my students.
Mm-hmm.
Going to work means I'm worrying about my coworkers. Going to work means I'm worrying about the field supervisors and their clients. So it's not a place to escape
Yeah.
anymore. It's a place that just adds to more possible griefs and stress.
But that's an excellent point. So often for me, my escape is a walk or the gym. And either it's not available or I have to do I have my mask? Do I have my hand sanitizer? How far away if I'm on the trails? Yeah, so all of that. I hadn't even thought about the escape part of it is not what it used to be when you could get away from those feelings. Yeah, thank you. And so then thinking about, what might we be experiencing? What are some of the things, like I'll give my example that has been so in my heart lately. Every time I see a video or, a stream of people making live music, I get really teary because I miss it so much, right? It's been a year since I've made live music in that way. What are some of the other things that, based on what we know about grief, that people might be experiencing that they might not even realize, oh, that's what this is.
Right. Grief touches every part of our lives. So our brains are different. Our ability to focus is different. Our productivity is different. Our immune system changes. We're more likely to have accidents. We're more at risk for heart attacks. Um, our relationships change because of grief. Sometimes our work changes
Mm.
because of grief. So it touches our culture. It touches our community. It touches our identity. It just touches every part of us, which is why it's so overwhelming and easy to feel like I'm not doing this well, or I haven't found that magic button that will make it all better. So now I'm not good at handling grief. And our society has traditionally done a horrible job of teaching us how to cope with grief, or what is even normal, that
Mhm.
we don't know. We don't know that it's normal to not be able to have the same productivity as before. We don't know that it's normal to not sleep well at night, or to sleep more than we used to. We lose weight or we gain weight. We rarely stay the same. That sometimes something like spirituality maybe brought us comfort before and now it doesn't. So it's really frustrating because we have not done a good job showing and teaching people what grief is. And then we have this horrible, complex experience of grief. And now we're all walking around going, what is this? Or I'm not doing this well. When in fact, um, all of that is probably grief. You know, if you
Yeah.
think about your life before the pandemic, anything that's changed or feels different, or that is your grief. And my grief looks different than your grief, even though you and I are very, very similar in many ways,
Yeah.
right?
And I think too, you hit on something that really resonated with me. I went through this period probably about 6 months ago of saying, okay, I have to stop blaming my lack of productivity on the pandemic. I have to stop using that as an excuse. And like, that's really not very healthy because of course, this is going to be ongoing and that I may have to make adaptations. But I was being very harsh on myself. And I think that need for ongoing kindness to ourselves is still so important. How does that factor in with your thoughts about grief?
I agree. I think because we have a society that says, oh, somebody important to you died, you get 3 days off and come back to work and be exactly like you were before they died, which is unrealistic. And then we have
Mm-hmm.
everybody walking around grieving, and we don't know how to interact with each other. And then it's so prolonged and it's chronic that we don't know how to, where is the end of this marathon? Because it
Yeah.
obviously wasn't a sprint. So we traditionally, I think, especially as music therapists, are not always good at being kind to ourselves. We're really good at being kind to others, but when we are needing that,
Mhm.
we don't give ourselves the same flexibility, kindness that we would give other people. And so I
Mhm.
think for me, part of this experiences has been really how am I giving back to people in my lives,
Yeah.
and then how am I receiving as well.
And what suggestions do you have there in terms of that? How can we help ourselves? How can we help others more fully through this?
I think we probably all could answer that, right? It's like a
Mm-hmm.
rational answer, like, am I drinking enough water? How's my nutrition? Did I really just eat that bag of chocolate for lunch? Yes, I did. Okay, well, maybe that's okay right now, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
doing it every day isn't the best idea. I think if we apply that rational thinking, have I talked to somebody that I care about that I haven't talked to in a while? So reaching out to people, it's so isolating.
Mm-hmm.
This pandemic has been so, so, so isolating that I can't state it enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy for us to rationalize that and say, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to see my friends because I don't want to put anybody at risk. The students are going to have to do all these online practicums. Whatever it is, that we rationalize it and it makes sense, but our heart still hurts. And we, as music therapists, tend to be social beings, even though a lot of us may be more introverts than extroverts. We still care about each other and we still have those connections and we still need them. And sometimes when grieving, it's really natural to become selfish, not in a I'm a mean kind of way, but a I am hurt and I need to take care of myself kind of way. And I don't think, again, we're great at acknowledging that being selfish can be positive, that there are good parts to it. So saying that I need to be selfish and what does that mean to me? Watching the music that fills you up or brings you some kind of something
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. And that taking time to do that might feel selfish because I know you're so busy, but that's maybe important to you.
Yeah.
And just really realizing that it's okay to be selfish and take care of yourself because this is real.
Yeah.
This is really devastating.
And
And
that
to, oh, sorry.
you go
Thank you.
ahead.
And to also realize you can't only be selfish because this is a community experience. We also need to look at the people around us. I
Hmm.
haven't heard from this person. Maybe I should drop them a line, or maybe I should reach out to somebody new. This could be an experience for that. But I can't be the giver only or the receiver only. I really need to be both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that really strikes me so much about the isolation. Even when we have interactions, it's so different. Particularly outside of your home, it's not the mask on. It's a different feel, and 6 feet, and so finding ways to sort of bridge those gaps and bridge that distance beyond our typical probably is really important for us right now. Which brings me to you mentioned music in there a little bit. What are your thoughts about using music in this way?
Well, we certainly know that music is. Thank you, Heather. We certainly know that music is a part of grief, right? So I did a study a while ago with Alexa where we surveyed people like what is their natural use of music and grief, and people really do that naturally. Non-music
Hmm.
therapists, right? So music can be that place where we find meaning in this pain, or music can be a place where it's that distraction. Music is a place that supports my culture. Music is a place that supports my identity. Music artists are really great about expressing feelings and thoughts that I may not be so great about.
Mm,
So it's normalizing in some ways. And I need that normalization. And music can be that place where there isn't silence when there is so much silence.
mm.
And music is a place in grief where we can discover who this new version of us is because we've all been changed. We are not going back to what we were before. We can't.
And I think that's so important to recognize that those changes, the external changes are so obvious. But yeah, I mean, especially after a year in this, we are not going to be the same people, which maybe is an opportunity. So I'm thinking about, that idea of hope. Like, what's the hope? What can we take from this in a way that can be helpful to us moving forward, do you think?
Right. There is hope. On one hand, now right now people are getting vaccinated. So there's that scientific, okay, this will change and end. But then there's also hope that I can think about times that were really meaningful and special to me during this horrible time. And that was like the pearl at the bottom of the ocean. And so looking for those moments, whether it's in music or it's within somebody else or within myself, taking time to intentionally realizing that the pandemic, not every single horrible aspect of it is the whole experience.
Yeah.
That there were moments that I laughed with a friend. There were moments when I heard music I had never heard before.
Mm.
Or I learned a new skill about Zoom today, like that will serve me going forward. So it's not as terrible as it is, and it absolutely has been terrible. That's not the whole experience.
Yeah. That we can take even in the midst of the horrible. We can find those, I love that, the pearls that can help us move forward. And I keep thinking about humanity too, that perhaps one thing we take from this too is the recognition of the humanity of each person around us, and how do we honor that, and the connections. I'm really so looking forward to those connections that will be more I think felt differently as we move out of this, and we will move out of this.
Right. This is not going to stay. This is not the new normal.
No. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for spending time with me today and giving us that perspective about the grief process and how we may be experiencing, and reminding us of all the important parts of how we can be moving forward in a healthier way. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Bye bye.
My name is Molly Hicks, and I'm a music therapist and bereavement counselor in the Philadelphia area. I recently created this ritual to help us pause and acknowledge the many losses that we've all experienced during this pandemic year. I'm going to share some music, followed by the reading of the ritual and lighting of the candles that I have before me. I hope that this time is meaningful and useful for you. We light this first candle to represent our past. We could not have conceived of how profoundly our lives would be affected by this virus. Our grief is complex, and we mourn for the ways in which life has changed. We light this second candle in honor and memory of the millions of people worldwide who have died from COVID-19. It feels impossible to comprehend such a number. These may be people whom we have known and loved deeply. We may have provided care for them as they took their final breaths. Or we may have only heard about them on the news, their names and images leaving lasting impressions. Each of these human beings were and are important. They will live on in our collective memory. We light this third candle to honor every person who has cared for members of the human family during this crisis. We hold close the healthcare workers on the front lines of hospitals, nursing homes, and home care, who are diligent and compassionate in the midst of suffering and have been changed by what they have witnessed. We hold close all those caring for emotional needs, who provide space for people to express themselves. We hold close all those people whose work ensures that we are fed and clothed. We hold close those who address the needs of our facilities, infrastructure, and transportation. We hold close teachers, parents, and other educators who share knowledge and model humility. We hold close our children who are bravely navigating this new world. We hold close spiritual leaders who offer solace as we explore questions that seem to have no answers. We light this fourth candle in support of all those who are grieving, including ourselves. We may be grieving for loved ones who died from COVID or from other causes during the pandemic. We may feel the pain of not being by their sides as they died and having to miss or postpone important rituals like memorial services. We may know or be one of those who have recovered from the virus but are struggling with its lingering effects. We may feel a sense of collective loss that is difficult to describe, one that intersects with other losses. our grief is valid. These 4 candles together also represent the 4 seasons of the year. The days, weeks, and months that we have endured may have passed by in a blur as we faced the crises around us and felt the ache of isolation. Even so, we may also be able to remember moments when we connected with the natural world in new ways and observed our surroundings with fresh eyes. We light a 5th candle to represent our future. We join together in hope for the health and well-being of the world, for new life, for equity and justice, and for clarity. We long for strengthened relationships with the people around us, and we will help each other maintain connections with those who have died. We will make space for ourselves to remember, to breathe, and to rest in this year and in the years to come.